Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of Season 3 of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. This is the 73rd episode of the show and the 50th regular episode. Today I'm joined by Casey Hall, a fine arts education program specialist from Georgia. Casey shares about ways that he used technology in his elementary music classes, but we also have a really relevant conversation about how to select technologies that help you stretch your teaching skills without overexerting yourself. Let's dive in.
I'm Jesse Lubinsky, host of the Partial Credit Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast with Jake Miller.
Welcome! Greetings, duct tapers. Thank you for being here today. As most of you already know, my name is Jake, and I'm here to talk to you about duct tape and educational technology, and how, in my silly mind, the two of them go together to form an EdTech integration mindset that I think that you could use in your learning environments now. I'm also here to talk to Casey Hall, a former music teacher and current fine arts education program specialist for the Georgia Department of Education. Casey shares about some great applications of technology from his music classes, but what I really want you to hear today is our honest, real conversation about having realistic expectations for your growth as an EdTech integrator. This chat with Casey is going to be like when you watch that TV show or movie and you're like, wait, why aren't they wearing masks? Why aren't they social distancing? I mean, Casey and I were social distancing since he was in Georgia and I was in Ohio, but you'll notice that there's no mention of remote learning or Zoom or Google Meet or anything like that. It's very un-2020. And that's because we recorded this back on March 4th at a time when our news sources were starting to talk about COVID and the possibility of things changing, but before we truly grasped how it would change our educational landscape. So it's kind of nice to go back to a simpler time when we didn't have to think about that kind of stuff. But still, even though we don't mention COVID teaching, Casey shares some amazing stuff. I can't wait for you to hear it. Well, I can wait a few minutes, actually, because I want to take a moment to remind you about my newsletter. The best way to make sure that you don't miss an episode of this podcast is to subscribe to the podcast, but the best way to make sure you don't miss a new blog post or EduGIF or anything like that is to sign up for my newsletter. Actually, I've got some special things in store for my newsletter subscribers, so if you're not signed up, what are you waiting for? Just head over to jakemiller.net/newsletter to sign up. That link is in the show notes, but seriously, jakemiller.net/newsletter can't be much easier to remember than that, right? So again, remember, sign up, subscribe for that newsletter, and while you're at it, subscribe for the podcast itself too. I also always share my upcoming calendar in that newsletter, but I wanted to share it really quickly here as well. In the first half of 2021, there will be 2 7-week cohorts of my virtual course called Best Practices and Tools for Learning in All Settings. The first of those cohorts, which is cohort number 8, starts in January, and another starts in March. That'll be cohort number 9. You can get details at jakemiller.net/KSU course 2020. And yes, I know by the time it starts, it will no longer be 2020. And I know we all want to forget about 2020, but I just don't have time to go change that link right now. Okay, just deal with it. jakemiller.net/KSU course 2020. And even though the KSU in there stands for Kent State University, that course is not limited to people that go to Kent State University or live near Kent State University or even have ever heard of Kent State University. They helped me put on this project, but it is available to all educators anywhere. Let's see, what else is coming up in 2021? I'll be part of Improv EdCon, hosted by my buddies Elizabeth and Daryl from Flippin' Good Tech. That's on January 21st. There's a link to that in the show notes. I'll be doing a virtual session for the ECOEA, that's the East Central Ohio Education Association, on January 30th. And if you've got an event coming up, virtual, I assume, I'd love to be a part of it. Please reach out to me via email at jakemillertech@gmail.com or head over to jakemiller.net/speaking. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let me just grab my soapbox from over here. Yeah. There we go. That's perfect. Climb up on there. Are you ready for the shortest soapbox moment in the history of this podcast? I didn't have time to prepare one for you today. And that's as important of a message that I can climb up on a soapbox and shout out to you guys as I possibly can be sharing with you today. Sometimes we don't have time. Sometimes we just can't. As the girls in the shows my daughter watches would say, I can't even. Seriously, though, sometimes you have to prioritize all of the things on your packed plates and pick some things that you just don't do, or you just don't do yet. I know that you want to get those papers graded before your next class period, but what's another day? Seriously, will it hurt anything to do it a day later? Maybe it will, but probably not. And that's just a decision that you need to make and think through. I'm not saying don't do the hard work and don't grade those papers. I'm saying if you've got 20 things to do right now, which you probably do because you're a teacher in 2020, you need to give yourself permission to push some of those back a little bit later and do the things that are priorities. Take this episode, for example. I thought about the things that I had to do, plan out what to say at the beginning, get the Education Podcast Network bumper ready, edit the interview, add in the super secret code, prepare the celebration of the adjacent possible for the end of the show, prepare the episode artwork, and a collection of other things. And it was too much. So I had to decide what I would do and what I would abandon. And today it was a soapbox moment. It's okay. It's okay to say this is more than I could do. And then to decide what plates to drop. It happens sometimes. That's it. That's the soapbox. I hope you're really hearing it. Before I start the interview with Casey, a quick note. Since we recorded this, Casey has transitioned into the role of a fine arts education program specialist at the Georgia Department of Education. Congrats on that, Casey. In that role, he supports fine arts teachers across the state of Georgia. So you'll hear me read his spring 2020 bio, but I wanted to update you with the current details here. Okay, here we go.
Today's guest.
All right, today my guest is Mr. Casey Hall. Casey is the Fine Arts Supports Teacher, or FAST for Fulton County Schools, and the music specialist at Wolf Creek Elementary in Atlanta, Georgia. As a FAST, or Fine Arts Supports Teacher, he coaches and supports other music teachers across the Fulton County schools. Most recently, he was awarded the title of 2019 to 2020 South Learning Community Teacher of the Year for Fulton County Schools. You could find Casey online on Twitter or Instagram at Mr. Hall Pass. Casey, welcome in. Thanks for being here, buddy.
Hey there. How are you?
I'm doing great. I love, by the way, I have to start off with your Twitter handle and your Instagram handle there. I love a good pun, as the listeners will not be surprised by. And so Casey Hall, of course, is Mr. Hall Pass on Twitter.
Yeah. So in my classroom, when I first started teaching, I agree with you. I love puns. And so I stuck as many musical puns, as many education puns as possible within my classroom. And that one just kind of naturally happened. It's a nice last name for a school teacher, I guess. So, so actually all of my hall passes are like the Mr. Hall Pass to the nurse, to the library, to the office. So that kind of evolved into my Twitter handle and Instagram.
That's awesome.
Handle and stuff like
That's
that.
awesome.
So yeah, it's a good little pun. Yeah. It's a nice little last name for a teacher.
I'm glad you were able to get that one. Well, I'm surprised that was available still when you joined. You must have joined.
Yeah, I agree. Right? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So for me in the classroom, I was always like Miller Lite to the kids. And I was like, kids, let's maybe not talk about Miller Lite in class. But you get to be Mr. Hall Pass. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nice. So tell me about that award you won there. That's exciting, man. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. It was a really good surprise, honestly. Yeah. So I got the nomination from my colleagues and peers at my school. Wow. And was honored to be selected. And yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, that's a huge compliment if you're in like a coaching role too, and yet still your colleagues are nominating you for a teaching award, because coaching could be a difficult position to be in where you're giving other instructors kind of advice and ask them questions about their practices and things like that. So to be still in that role and to be honored as a teacher of the year, congratulations for sure.
So the beautiful part of kind of being that coach role and the music specialist is I kind of have a hat or feet in both ponds, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So I do get to see like the coaching aspect where I go to other schools and support those teachers.
Casey, are you getting pulled over right now while we're talking right now?
No, I live in the heart of Atlanta, so yeah,
you hear that regularly.
So I get that's hilarious.
I felt like I had to interrupt you because everybody's going to be listening and be like, "Wait a minute, am I getting pulled over right now?" They're like in their cars, like working.
Yeah,
So
I was like, I wonder if
interrupt
you can hear that right now. So cool. Glad to know you can.
you.
Um, anyways, so I get to kind of see and support those teachers who need, whether that's lesson planning, curriculum support, behavior management. So I get to see kind of the instructional coach side of things,
Mhm.
but also I'm still in the classroom 4 out of the 5 days of the week. So, so it was a great honor.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Congrats.
Thanks.
So now that we've gotten serious here, talking about some of these, talking about your award and everything and the coaching stuff, let's get a little bit silly. Let's play a game. Are you ready for a game?
Always.
Always nice. So we're gonna play a game of 2 truths and 1 lie.
2 truths and 1 lie.
So Casey, you're gonna give me 3 statements. 2 are going to be true. 1 is going to be a lie, in case you didn't understand the name of the game. And then I am going to try to guess which one was the lie. I'll get it wrong, and then I'll butcher the format of the game too, because even though this is my podcast and we're on like episode 41 right now, and I've been playing this game throughout all of them, I still butcher this game every time. So what are your 3 statements, Casey?
Okay. So my first statement is I have sang on Broadway.
Okay.
My second statement is I am colorblind.
Okay.
And my third statement is I have gone to the Grammy Awards.
Wow. Okay, those are some good ones. Let's see. Sang on Broadway. Well, obviously, you're a music guy. You're a music teacher. You've got a good voice. You got a voice for podcasting, Casey. I'll say so. I'll believe the Broadway thing is possible. So I'm gonna guess the colorblind is the lie. Is that your lie?
Nope.
You are colorblind?
Yes, I am colorblind. Yeah.
Okay. That is that. How is that affected in your classroom? Like do you see a lot of issues? Or I guess the thing that interests me more is that how does that impact the way that you design content for students? Does it have a role in the way you think things through for your students?
There's a funny story behind the colorblindness thing. Is I didn't know that I was colorblind until I was 22. So, I have glasses. So I have gone to the eye doctor every year to get a checkup and stuff like that, and new prescriptions. And no doctor had ever given me a colorblind test. And so until I was 22. And so they were like, show me the circles with the dots and the numbers in them. And I can see some of them. And then like she kept flipping and I was like 13, 72, 8. And then I would see nothing. And so I was like, this is weird. And she's like, oh, you're colorblind. And I was like, what? Why am I just finding this out now?
You just set it off the cuff like that.
Yeah. So I was like, okay. So it was a kind of eye-opening experience because I feel like I see color and I see color fairly well, or at least what I think is, colorful.
That's interesting.
So technically I'm just red-green colorblind, and as the doctor described it to me, it's like, I guess, more muted would be a way to say it. I'm not sure because I don't know what the other side looks like.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I don't think I really have issues, and if I do, like I can't, like purples are really hard for me to see in because I can't see the red in the purple. I can see the blue fine.
Interesting.
But I can't see the purple. So I have like bought articles of clothing that I thought were just like a nice blue, but it was actually purple. Like, so things like that, or darker shades. So I kind of like stay to things that I definitely know, like this is green, this is purple, this is, that I can see. So to answer your question, I don't think it actually affects my teaching or designing of lessons really at all.
Interesting. So, okay, so what's your lie then? So I'm gonna guess now that the lie is the Grammy Awards. You've never been to the Grammys.
No, I have.
I was wrong again.
Yeah.
So when did you go to the Grammys, and what led you to being there?
So I was randomly on Instagram one day, like any normal person. And nowadays, this is in 2016, by the way.
Okay, not as normal in 2016. You were on the bleeding edge there. Okay, go ahead though.
Yeah. I was. Anyways, and I was just flipping through, and I saw this ad for Delta, and it was like, "Where has music taken you?" And it was ended up being like a Delta Grammy Awards contest where you would post a picture, and I guess if you got selected, you know, top 5 answers got chosen to go to the Grammy. So I might have did like a little selfish plug and put like a picture of me in my chorus.
You deserve it. You're a teacher. You deserve that.
Right. So, anyways, I got chosen on my birthday, which was nice. It was a cool surprise. So, Delta flew us out, me and my friend, and we went to the Grammy Awards. We were treated like celebrities, got to walk down the red carpet, got to do a backstage tour, had amazing seats.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was a really, really cool experience. And
that is rad. That's
cool. It was awesome. It was just wild. Like treated completely like a celebrity. Went to all these fancy soirees and you know, got to meet Leon Bridges and Andra Day. I don't know if you know who they are, but So it was an awesome experience. Totally.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah. Really rad. Neat. So let's talk about some educational duct tape. So for listeners out there who might be new to the show, the way educational duct tape works and where it comes from is my metaphor that educational technology is at its best when we're using it as a tool to solve problems, to meet goals, to address learning standards, not as the focus of the lesson. So we're not thinking like, let's use this technology. We're thinking, this is what I need to accomplish as a teacher. And then the technology becomes a tool for doing that. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. So my question for you, Casey, since you're a music teacher, you're the perfect person to ask this question to. How does implementing technology in the music classroom help to engage students in music making and music learning? So in other words, let me rephrase that as in an educational duct tape way. How can we implement technology in the music classroom to help engage students in music learning and music making?
I think that's honestly, a great question to ask, because a lot of the times I feel like the arts are kind of like looked over when it comes to that stuff, because we're not, you know, until, you know, the Every Student Succeeds Act was passed, we weren't not a core subject. And thankfully, like now that we can be seen as a core subject and we can actually advocate ourselves as the arts are what part of makes, you know, a whole child, that now we're kind of like seen in a different light, I feel like, and it's easier for us to advocate for ourselves. So I applaud you for asking this question. I think it's a very broad question because, you know, we're talking about music education K-12, and there's so many different content areas and domains that go with that. Like, or how would you implement technology in high school chorus or middle school orchestra, or, you know, in my case, I'm a general music teacher in elementary school. So
that's a good point, because I used to be a math teacher, and often when I go speak somewhere or something like that, somebody will say, how can I use technology in the math classroom? And my mind goes like, whoa, that is such a huge question. Like what grade level math classroom? What concept are you learning about? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to demonstrate things to students or have them demonstrate their understanding? Are they graphing? Are they drawing? Like, are you formatively assessing? What are you doing? That's a huge question. So yeah, of course, it'd be the same thing in music curriculum, where it depends on literally what class is it and what kind of content are they trying to learn and what are you trying to achieve as the teacher? That's a great point.
Yeah. And even in my case, I teach kindergarten through 5th grade. So I see 6 grade levels, and you actually have to think about like developmental level of a kindergartner versus developmental level of a 5th grader, and how can you still use technology to be effective in a creative way. So I am a huge proponent, honestly, of being culturally relevant to your students. I know that's kind of a big buzzword, I guess you could say, is being relevant to your students. In my master's degree, when I was doing my research, I actually heavily researched all these different cultural pedagogies that that are out there currently, and kind of molded them all into one kind of conglomerate, I guess you could say, that was just like using culture to drive your instruction. And one of my arguments in my kind of cumulative ideas was that if you're not using technology in the classroom, you're not being culturally relevant, because it's 2020 at this point. You know, like technology is part of, you know, kind of become like who we are as humans right now because of all that stuff. So because of that, I think I've always kind of been influenced by technology. So, you know, it's like kind of be like hip with the kids, because all the kids know way more about the technology coming into it. Like I'm so surprised when I give a kindergartner an activity with technology, and they can figure it out so quickly now. So even it took me like hours to figure out how I'm going to do this, but they figured it out in like 2 seconds.
Right.
And another point I wanted to make, the issue of access to technology. I realize as a part of the implementing technology period is access. That is a huge issue in education, I think, still, even though it's like, again, I say it's like it's 2020, like this shouldn't be an issue anymore, but unfortunately it still is. So, and that's evident even in my own situation, even though we are Title I schools, we are still able to implement technology just in different ways. We kind of have to be more creative. We're still holding our own. When I say that, I'm meaning like I've had to, specifically in my music classroom, I've had to advocate for technology through fundraisers like Donors Choose.
Nice.
I've gotten some devices from them, which has been amazing. I got some grants where we got about 10 iPads, which was great. So it's just like things like that or have not been given to me, but I've advocated and have searched out for and really been proactive.
Right.
And hey, this is important in order to be relevant, kind of circling back around. In order to be relevant, I need these things to be successful as a 2020, music teacher. And getting those was huge.
Right.
What I think is really beautiful about technology is that it can be used in so many ways. And so how even just having one device in a classroom can still make a difference. When I, first started teaching, I was using my phone constantly. And I know like, oh my God, phone in the hands of kids was a thing, but I had to do something, when it came to like, I have to engage them in some way. So even if it was like using little small music apps as a tuner, and like those kind of introduction of technology, like, hey, we have this thing where you can tune our ukuleles, or I can play a little melody on my piano app to get us started, like those kind of things, like super simple. So specifically in the music classroom, something that I'm always asking myself is, how are my students making music each day? And it doesn't necessarily always involve technology. I agree with how you kind of refer to as the duct tape, as it's a tool. It's not the end all be all. It's not replacing other things. It is enhancing things. And so how can I use technology to enhance what I'm already doing in my classroom so that my kids can have an even more engaging and interactive way to learn, maybe something they've never seen before, for instance. Because the question is so broad, I can't speak to exactly how you would use it in a high school level or a middle school level. So I'm going to speak to specifically the elementary side, the kindergarten through fifth grade, the primary grades. So a lot of what I do in my classroom has things that I kind of piece things together when it comes to a concept in music. So if we're talking about rhythm, for instance, how am I going to teach rhythm? And I kind of pick and choose these activities that will get the students to master whatever standard or task or goal that we have set. And so a lot of the times when I'm implementing, or I should say introducing, not implementing, a new concept or a new idea or a new strategy, or just a new way to make music that they maybe haven't been done before, I'll use a presentation tool that most of the time ends up being Nearpod, because it is a really great way to engage students in learning, a way to engage them in different cool ways, and it's constantly evolving, which is nice. At first, when I just had my laptop and a projector, I didn't even have like a fancy smart board or Promethean, but I was using Nearpod initially through just one screen, and we would go through it basically at like a PowerPoint presentation. And on the other side, I would have the student side so students could see, and we could take quizzes and things like that through Nearpod. I just automatically saw the engagement switch even through that different way to present, even though it was such a small addition to what I was already doing. I was already presenting the information. I was just doing it using Nearpod as like a mode of transportation for the information to go to the students, basically.
Right. Normally, when somebody says, I'm going to start using Nearpod, it's because they're presenting already on the screen and their kids aren't following along at their seats. And Nearpod is the way to make them follow along because if they're in a one-to-one classroom, the kids can see the same things on their screen. So what drew you to Nearpod then when your kids didn't have devices?
So this was kind of like old school Nearpod, I guess you could say,
right.
Not in a bad way, because it was, I still saw Nearpod's potential. It was just like, okay, well, I don't have all these devices. And knowing that I wasn't going to get an accurate like data report from the kids, but it was still a way for me to kind of do like a quick little formative check what the students knew when we would do like the things like the quizzes and like the fill in the blanks and stuff like that when it started out.
So even though you weren't seeing student by student answers at that time, you were still able to use those questions whole class and get like by a show of hands or something like that. You were able to do those formative assessment checks.
Yeah, exactly. And so as I got more and more technology through the advocacy and through the grant writing processes and stuff like that, then I was really using Nearpod for its real potential. And I don't have a class set of 30 iPads or 30 devices, period, but I was able to group students and, groups of like 3 or 4, and then they were working as a team. So it was kind of like narrowing down the data basically. With what I had, and when I first, got the donors choose things, it was just 3 iPads. So I was using technology there, in regards, I was having like maybe almost like stations, I guess you could say, in like a station rotation in my classroom. And like, there was just 3 iPad stations. One was Nearpod, another one was something else, maybe some sort of like creation app, so as I have gotten the technology for my classes, I feel like I've also evolved in what I'm using it for, I guess you could say. So, but truthfully, I think the one big tech thing that has really transformed my teaching though has been Nearpod, and I know I keep plugging them because they deserve it in my opinion.
And I think that's true of all educators. Like, it's not always the same tool with every educator, but we have these tools that have revolutionized what we're doing in our classrooms, and you're right, they deserve it. Like when somebody else comes on and they say like Pear Deck or Flipgrid or whatever it might be, like those companies, those apps, those deserve it too, because they really are doing awesome things as tools in our classrooms to really reinvent the way we're doing things in your classroom. So it's awesome that you're, shining the spotlight on Nearpod for that. Yeah.
And another thing about that, like as a music person, we see many students at one time. So, in 1 week, I'm seeing the entire school. My school is roughly 800 kids. That's a lot of kids. And, if we're expected to collect data pieces on all of those students and track data and using that data to inform your further instruction, like that becomes daunting for us. And I don't think people really, when you put that in perspective, like any teacher would want to pull their hair out, So, Nearpod, again, was another way, because Nearpod keeps all that data, collects it for you, and makes it into this nice, pretty report that I could just literally hand over to my principal and says, look at the growth from this class to this class, and that's something that I still do. I don't do all the time, but it's just like, hey, like this is just a check that like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And here's evidence of that in the classroom. And it's not like I'm, again, like kind of like I was saying earlier, I'm not replacing my instruction with Nearpod. I'm just using it to engage them in way more creative ways than I have before. Because even things like I do a lesson, for instance, on the difference between rhythm and steady beat. It's very basic. The two concepts are very basic, but
it's not basic for me, Casey. I completely lack rhythm and the ability to follow a beat. But anyhow, go ahead.
Everybody has potential.
You're right.
So, anyways, that's understanding the difference between rhythm and steady beat is a very abstract concept, though it is a very basic skill. It's beat is the foundation of music. Without beat, we wouldn't have music that we have today. So I do this whole lesson, and we have a Chinese boat song, and I present my information like I would on PowerPoint, or whether with slides that are interactive and engaging, colorful and stuff like that. But then it's like using Nearpod, I can take it one step further. And instead of having a picture of China or, the river in China that we sing about, or the song, that the song is from, we can actually go there using their virtual classroom field trips, where I can type in the river in China that we talk about, that the song came from, and they can see it. And, it's a 3D picture. And so it's kind of like they're there. And it's just like it's crazy to just kind of sit back and watch the magic happen, right, I guess, as a teacher, because you sit there and like they're, like looking at a picture, that's great and all, and you can imagine, but then actually being able to look up, down, all the way around, it's just such a cool thing that Nearpod has.
Oh yeah.
That has just, again, it's just an engagement tool. It's not that, I think it's important to know where China is and to see the river in a picture, but then just to be there, I've never been to China.
Right.
I don't know what it's like, but so for even me, it was a mind-blowing experience. So when I hand, an iPad to a group of kindergartners and we flip to that slide with the virtual field trip, and they're looking at China and looking at the river that we're singing at, and it kind of just makes it so much more relatable, I guess.
Right. Oh, totally. Yeah.
And it just kind of gives them that like next level experience that otherwise they wouldn't be able to have.
Yeah. So Nearpod VR, like it's great, like number one, as just like a hook to get the kids engaged and interested in the information, but it's kind of plays in with that dual coding theory and some of the things that we know from brain science, is that the more different ways you give kids to connect with some information, the more memorable it becomes for them. That I'm sure that music now is kind of connected in the pathways of their brain back to what they know this area of China or wherever it might be in a different song. To look like. So yeah, that's huge as a connection. And that's one of those tools, as I mentioned Pear Deck earlier, and they're both phenomenal tools, but VR is one of the things that really sets Nearpod apart, is that they have that tool built right into there that the other comparable tools do not.
Yeah. And so that also kind of like clicks, a kind of a checkbox on, standards when you're like writing lessons too, because at least in, the national standards for music, and in Georgia, we kind of, there's three artistic processes. There's creating, performing, and responding. But then there's this fourth other, it's not an artistic process, but it's connecting basically. And so it's connecting music to the other fine arts, connecting music to history and culture. So those are, you're also checking those kind of standards when you're able to go that next level. And I'm just happen to be using Nearpod as that tool to kind of wrap all that into one. So Nearpod is, like I was saying, the most easiest way that I have been able to implement technology in my classroom. Of course, I use other apps. I've used Flipgrid in my classroom as well. You spoke of that earlier.
Yeah.
In very inventive ways. Things like I had something come up and couldn't make it to auditions for our chorus. So we did chorus auditions on Flipgrid, that kind of thing, where it saved actually time, It was wild. The response was so cool. The kids really liked it. So they got to, do it at home. They didn't have to come to school and sit through an audition, but I got to see everybody sing and stuff like that. So
it probably really helped on both ends with like them not being as nervous, right, when they're performing, because you're not right there looking at them, and you like your reaction to their music or whatever not being of a concern to them, where like you might be sitting there like with your thoughtful face, and they might be thinking like, oh, is he liking what I'm playing? Like, am I playing it well enough? Like, how's he feeling about this? And so they can do it that way. And then that gives you the time to like re-listen to things. And then also from the student perspective, they kind of have multiple chances. Like we talk about with tests, like if a kid gets a multiple chances to take that test and improve their score, they're doing better at it. And the same thing would be true here. You're seeing that kid's best possible work when they finally click submit on that video. So, even if it took them 4 or 5 times to actually submit it, you're seeing their best possible content there. And so you're seeing them actually, because that's what you want. You don't want a kid necessarily that starts off by playing the music or singing the music or whatever it is perfectly. You want a kid that can get there, right? Can get to that highest level. And that process probably did that for you.
Yeah. So a lot of the technology I've used has been to engage students in music learning. When it comes to more things of music making, in regards to music making, a lot of the things that I'm using in the classroom are things like Incredibox, which is honestly, I love it. The kids love it too. It is like pre-made loops. When I'm describing it to kids, it's kind of like you're being a mini DJ. So when I'm using Incredibox in my classroom, I'm actually, we're talking about texture and stuff like that, and timbres of the different sounds that you're hearing as you're kind of creating it. But essentially, I kind of wrap it all around into like basically they become a DJ for a class or a project, and they get to basically use these pre-made loops in different ways and basically make their own mix, which is kind of cool. So we have like a whole little mini unit on that when we're making music. It's not like, we can take it a step. I've had some kids like go home, make a complete MP3. You can record it and then save it as an MP3 and they can listen to it again. I've heard like kids like make little mini raps and mini songs with it, it's just kind of cool to see how they kind of take it to the next level. I never asked them to do that because that wasn't the point of me using it in the classroom, but they kind of took it to that next level.
That's when you found a good tool, right?
Yeah. It's really cool. And I think every so often they add a new version. So they keep it kind of fresh and different. And
So I'm not familiar with Incredibox. I had never heard of it. So I just, as we were talking, I Googled it. I wasn't being a very attentive listener. I was geeking out on their website a little bit, but it looks like it's iOS and it's Android and it's Amazon, but it also works on Macs and Microsoft computers, and it looks like there's a web version too as well. So it would work anywhere, right?
Yeah. So the web version, the only thing it is free on the web, but it's limited in the number of versions you can use.
I see. Okay.
So they can use the first 4 currently online for free, and then once you download the app, it is a paid app. So a lot of my kids usually just use the web version,
right?
Thankfully, on my devices, I just have paid out of pocket for them to be able to use the full version. So at least they have that. But yeah, it is a really cool app. And even though, yes, I'm teaching them about textures and timbres and stuff like that, they're also getting able to make the music with it.
Right.
And it's just really fun and engaging, and it's super easy to use. And the kids know exactly what to do by the time I finish talking.
So is it intended as an educational app, or is it really just intended as this is a music maker app, essentially?
I think, I don't know much about the background of how it got started and stuff, honestly. I just saw it and I was like, I can use this in my classroom in some way.
Yeah.
But I just kind of adopted it into my own arsenal of things, tech things that I use every year in my classroom. And kids ask for it all year long too.
Oh,
when are we going to play that again? When are we going to play that, Mr. Hall? Kind of thing, So that's fun. And actually, also in music making, I do use Nearpod too. And that's more as a part of their compositions. So when I'm asking kids to hey, I want you to clap a rhythm, very simple rhythm. It could be whatever.
Okay.
All right. So I want you to write that down on a Draw It in Nearpod. So I've used Draw It a lot in regards to music, music making and composition, actually. And then they get to save it. And then I can always pull those, in the report, I can pull their compositions out and we can see, and then they can you maybe transfer that over into instruments. Okay, you played this rhythm last week. Let's take this and make a whole piece of music out of it, kind of thing, but still using Nearpod as a way to keep all that info. So I'm not having 800 sheets of paper in my classroom all the time.
Yeah.
It's in Nearpod, saved, ready to go, which is really cool.
Today's super secret code is police, as in the sirens that we heard twice during my chat with Casey. So if you want a certificate of listening, laughing, and learning for today's episode, head to eduducttape.com/certificate. Select this episode and type in the code POLICE.
I have also dabbled in music recording and stuff like that. At the elementary level, it is a little tricky, like things like GarageBand and stuff like that, because just there's a little more convoluted when it comes to like a kindergartner on GarageBand is
no.
like that's just not going to happen. Their attention span is
right.
But I have worked with that, like getting kids to record a rhythm, and then mainly the upper grades, like fourth and fifth, getting them to, and it was, let me pause that story and say this, that a lot of these things that I'm saying I have done like once or twice, but and I still see that as a success. I don't do them all the time because it is a lot of work, and it is a lot to like figure out things like GarageBand myself. Like it took me forever, so many YouTube tutorials, so many like articles about, GarageBand. So I totally 100% get it when teachers like, I don't have the time for that. Like, so I think it is partially a willingness to accept that kind of work that needs to be done.
Well, you do it when there's the value, when the value of the impact that you're getting out of it outweighs the amount of time that you have to put into it, right? So you said like it took a long time to learn how to use GarageBand, and if that's a very small value for you, it doesn't really represent a big like box being checked off in your standards or in your goals for your students, then maybe you don't put the time into learning it, right? Because it's really like, even though it's a great technology, like it really has to meet a goal that you have in the classroom,
right? And I think that at one time that did meet like things like, when I was talking about the project, like the kids recorded themselves playing and then added a layer and recorded another one. So it was like a contrasting thing. There was one group that, so it's things like that we've recorded and made like this whole thing, but it took a long time. It took a lot of work, and it's not something that I am capable of doing all the time, but at least I am taking those steps to saying, you know what, even though this is a big chunk of time of project, I'm still getting, we're still meeting standards in these ways using this technology tool. I'm just not using that tool all the time.
Right.
So yeah, I think that, we have, and again, we wear so many hats as teachers, that the time is an issue, but I agree with you when you say like, it's not the technology is not an end all be all. And if it's not meeting a certain goal, then why are you using it other than to just say, hey, look at me, I'm using technology in the classroom.
Yeah. And sometimes if it could meet a goal and you're not using it, the question kind of is like, why are you not using it? And then sometimes there's rationale, like for you were talking about those Nearpod draw it slides and how you have the kids drawing that on paper. Drawing it on paper or drawing it in Nearpod. Like you certainly could have the kids drawing it on paper, but you realized that this was getting unwieldy for you to keep track of all that information and truly assess the kids. So then it became like, I should be doing this, right? And so then you put that in as part of the things you're doing. And if you don't, like if you have a coworker or another music teacher who's got those 800 pieces of paper to look through to see if every kid understands how rhythms and compositions and things like that work, and they're complaining about it, then it's almost like, well, why aren't you doing something else, right? So sometimes there's both sides of the coin, right? If it's not really checking a box for you, then you don't really need to put the time into it. But if you have a box that's empty there, right, and it's a problem for you, then you should be putting the time into learning how to do it. When you talk about GarageBand, are the kids using like loops and the built-in instruments in there, or are you like hooking up to live instrumentation?
When I've done it in the past, I first wanted them to create their rhythm itself, and then record that, and then add to the next layer, that kind of thing, instead of using the loops, because I wanted them to be essentially, I know like you still make music when you're using loops, but I wanted them to get the whole experience. It's more than just okay, let's make loops. Kind of like Incredibox. It's, like you can record that, but you're not actively performing the music that you're creating.
Right.
So I kind of wanted them to record it themselves first, and then later, if we ever got time to it, we could add loops or sound effects and stuff like that if we wanted to. But at a certain point too, and I kind of realized that even I could see the engagement in the kids' eyes. They were also getting, because it ended up lasting a lot longer than I thought in my head. I mean, I'm working with 10-year-olds,
Right. Yeah.
I'm not working with adults. So it took longer than I had envisioned and I had planned for. So though we had a product that came out, I feel like the kids, because it took so long, their own engagement across a span of weeks dwindled, kind of thing. So I guess that's another side of technology. I'm getting pulled over again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I hear that. That's okay.
So, actually, because of how much work GarageBand required me to do as a teacher, it was kind of like what you're saying. I realized that it was the time versus the impact was not greater than.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. There's that key relationship you've got to balance in your classroom, because as a teacher of any content area, you only have so much. You have a finite amount of time that you could dedicate to the things you're doing in your classroom, and sometimes your time can be spent better than using technology X or technology Y or whatever it might be. You really got to analyze, what's my return on investment here? If I'm going to put all this time into it, is that getting me the return on investment that I needed to get? Right.
Yeah. So I guess, to kind of wrap up your whole question, is that if there are teachers out there who are wanting to incorporate technology and implement it in their classrooms, honestly, just start small. And if you have an idea because of an app that you see or because of a tool online that you see, just start there. And it's okay to take small steps and to show that you are being relevant to your students. You want to be relevant to your students. And so just using the small steps of, okay, I'm just going to worry about this one for right now. If this one's successful, if it does well, if I see an engagement increase, if I see a learning increase, if I see growth from my students because of this, then you're okay, that went well.
Right.
What else can I do? And start from there. I feel like a lot of the times teachers get so bogged down because now there is so much. There's the opposite. There is all of these, it's the opposite of the side of the coin. There's so much that teachers get overwhelmed with all of the things that are out there. But if you just find something, if it works, that's great. If it doesn't, why did it not work? Was it a lack of planning? Was it a lack of materials? Was it a lack of engagement from your students? You just didn't work. Then, don't beat a dead horse, So,
it's important to reflect on what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really do stand by that. Just to take the small steps, and then honestly, just to celebrate those small wins, post things to, your Twitter and stuff like that and brag about it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. You deserve to. Yeah.
You put all of that work, show it. So,
I think that's great advice. The taking small steps and starting small and then taking small steps, because those are when we see those wins, and those are when we feel like if we're trying something new and it's relatively small, that's kind of like that comfortable area, right? Where we're maybe not comfortable. Maybe comfortable is the wrong word. Actually, that's that area just above comfortable where we're not overwhelming and intimidating ourselves, but we are challenging ourselves to move forward in a way that's relatively easy for us and convenient for us and comfortable for us, so we can grow in that. And then, like you were kind of saying, then reflect on those pieces of what you're doing. We talk on the show a lot about what's called adjacent possible, which is everything you try and everything you expose yourself to opens you up to new possibilities that are kind of adjacent to what you're already doing. So you were saying you started using Nearpod just at the teacher screen, and then that opened you up to the possibility of having it on student screens and groups. And then you probably started going from, doing just presenting with it to then you're asking multiple choice questions with it. And then you're like, oh, I can ask fill in the blank questions with it. And then that became, well, I could use the draw it slides to have kids show their compositions. And then you added in Nearpod VR. You probably didn't do it all at once. You kept adding things as they happened. And then you mentioned Incredibox, you might find that when kids get in there, they're having some really cool thought processes as they're developing their music in it. But you, as the teacher, can't know what every kid is learning as they're going through making those songs. So maybe the kids start screencasting in Incredibox and create a video of them explaining what they've done in Incredibox and their audio, and then posting it to Flipgrid for other kids to see. but you don't do it all at once, right? You add in these little pieces and you move forward at a comfortable yet challenging rate so that you keep growing as a teacher, right? And you keep staying relevant, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it so eloquently. Thank you.
Yeah. Those were your ideas. I just put them all together, Casey.
Yeah. Well, it was great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So,
yeah. Well, Casey, I'm so glad you were on to share some of these ideas of what you do in the music classroom and kind of how it parallels what we do in every other classroom. Like, it doesn't have to be different, but how you're using some of these same exact technologies that we might use in a science or language arts or Spanish class. You're using them in a music class, but just in slightly different ways. And it all comes back to those goals. So I really appreciate you sharing how it relates, in the music classroom.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on. It's been awesome chatting with you today.
Yeah. Thank you, man. So glad to finally feature my interview with Casey in today's episode. He shared some really awesome stuff. I felt bad that I didn't air it right afterwards. As you know, the world kind of went topsy-turvy after we recorded that. So I'm glad to finally get it out there so that you guys can hear it, because he shared some really fantastic stuff in it. Last but certainly not least, time for my favorite part of the show, which is the celebration of the adjacent possible. As I mentioned late in that interview, actually, adjacent possible is the idea that whatever you do, whatever you try, whoever you talk to, whoever you listen to, wherever you go, opens you up to new adjacent possibilities. And the connections and discussions between me and you, between duct tapers, between educators, those open up our adjacent possibilities. So today's celebration of the adjacent possible is an Apple Podcasts review from MOMPOLOIK, whose review is titled Invaluable Resource, and it reads, "This is one of a handful of podcasts I never miss. I love Jake's format and his topics are always informative." Thank you so much for that, Mom Poloik, or Mom Polo IK, or Mompo Loik. Who knows? Whoever you are, thank you. I really do appreciate it. If you want to be a part of the celebration of the adjacent possible in a future episode, we'd love to have you. You could share some kind words like that review did, or ask a question, or share a takeaway, or share something that you're excited about, whatever you prefer. You could do that with an Apple Podcast review, as the one we just heard, a post on social media with the hashtag EDUDuctTape, or on the show's Flipgrid at flipgrid.com/EDUDuctTape. If you share on one of those platforms, you've got a really good chance that I'll share it in an upcoming episode. So that does it for today's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please tell a friend, tell a colleague that's more of an acquaintance than a friend, or share about it with the hashtag EDUDuctTape on social media. Check the show notes for details about signing up for my newsletter, joining the Duct Tapers Facebook group, inquiring about having me work with you or your team of educators, getting some podcast stickers, and more. As always, as a parent, I'm grateful for the work you do, and as an educator, I'm proud of you for your dedication to lifelong learning. And I will see you guys in a fortnight.
Thank you for listening to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Please visit eduducttape.com to join the discussion, share possible topics, inquire about being a guest, or contact Jake. And remember, duct is spelled with a T, not a quack quack K.